don't know if it's working. Does that work? Okay, so that's no OBS. Okay. Wow. I don't know if you guys can hear me. I can't hear. My internet says I'm at 5 megabytes per second. This is fun. This is what paying for super awesome business internet gets me. Oh, geez. This is a nightmare. Why? I don't know. I hope you guys can hear me. I hope that everything sounds right. Let's see. I'm going to see. So if there's echoing, I'm sorry. Wow, that looks terrible. That video looks so bad. I am so sorry, you guys. If I start yelling, that's because I can't hear anything. Usually there's an echo of my voice back to me, so I don't start yelling. So I am so sorry. But we fixed it. We fixed it a little bit at least. Like, I'm still trying to run a speed test here, and my internet apparently like almost went out as well. So that mixed with problems with OBS. So I hope you guys can hear me. I hope everything's fine. If it's not, somebody let me know because I won't know otherwise. Until I'm like, hey, what happened with that? But thank you so much for stopping by, you guys. Let me just jump to my my videos page because I think I have like 4 ended live streams for this. Like it's been a hot minute. We spent almost half an hour trying to figure out what was going wrong, everything. I still don't know. That'll be a fun thing for me to figure out later. Oh yeah, wow. There's all of these thumbnails for it. Okay, let me just delete those, delete those, delete those. Okay. Okay, it's fine. It's fine. We are just making our way downtown. Oh, okay. Video is very pixelated, yes, because apparently I'm running on 5 megabytes per second internet. Why? I don't know. I pay for business class and my PC is like was getting fine. Like I said, I was playing video games before this, you guys. I was playing an MMORPG and I was all up in the interwebs. And yeah, now I'm just like 5 megabytes per second. That is not a lot. That is not a lot. Megabytesy. I don't know what exactly that translates to. I just know that is not a lot, but whatever. We are here. Welcome in, everybody. I have no idea what it was. Like I said, I was playing ESO earlier and no problems. I did updates on Steam for my video games. No problems. Everything was going super fast, super efficient. As soon as I wanted to start streaming, it went out. So I apologize for the video. Yeah, I'm really sorry about that, you guys. Hopefully, it'll pick up a little bit. Everything will go through. We restarted the PC. We restarted a lot of things. Not just using my streaming software. So, fun times, you guys. Fun times. Well, welcome in, everybody. This is Sheena Loves Stories. I'm all discombobulated now, TBH, not gonna lie. But it's a Sheena Loves Stories, and it says we are back to excellent internet. I don't know. If it's still pixelated, I guess you just listen. Just listen. There's just gonna be this face you guys are gonna see. All my extra cameras weren't working. So who knows? Who knows? all the PC problems today in my household, which I'm like, it's funny. Why? Why don't you want to be us? Why don't you want us to be on the PC? What's going on? What's happening? Anyways, welcome in everybody. I am Sheena from Sheena Loves Stories. This is the live stream that we're going to be doing every Sunday. Like, I'll find a way. Like, as you guys see, I'll find a way. But this is week 6 of 52. We're going over the 52 key chapters in the Bible that John Barnett, one of the amazing teachers, I'll have to update all the stuff in the description below. Oh, hi. How are you? I hope you are doing well. We had all the problems today, but this is great. This is fine. We are okay. You guys can hear me. That's the main part of this. So, we are going through this is week 6 in the 52 key chapters of the Bible, which John Barnett, which, like I said, I'll add everything in the description below if you guys are watching later. If you guys want to check it out now, you can check out the previous 52 weeks, and he'll have his website, his YouTube page, everything. He's doing all of the great things. A missionary with his wife, Bonnie. He's laid out a plan for the 52 chapters of the week to kind of get you to know the Bible more in a year. And I am a new Christian, became Christian in April of this year. So April, May, June, July, what's this? August, September, almost 5 months. Almost 5 months. So we're going through this. This week has been Exodus. This week and last week we were in Exodus. Last week we did Exodus 13. I don't remember. But that was the final plague and the Jewish people getting out of Israel. And we went over the plagues and things last week. What I did want to do as well is let you guys know something that I found out, which I thought was really great. I was listening to a video it was actually about antichrists. And my husband and I have been reading the New Testament when we do our Bible studies on Sundays. So wanted to bring that up because I did mention in the last video that they were in Egypt for 430 years, but that's from the time of Joseph. What I failed to mention last week was that they didn't spend the whole 430 years as slaves. What is this? Oh, sorry, I keep getting distracted. I'm so sorry about that. But they didn't spend the whole 430 years as slaves. They did spend a portion of that, but the video I was listening was actually talking about Antichrist and brought up the fact that the Pharaoh in the time of the Exodus could have been an Antichrist in that generation, because in the New Testament, it said in the apostles and everything that there's multiple Antichrists, and it's not until they get to the Antichrist that it'll be the end of days and the end of time. So going through, my husband and I were discussing several different type of Antichrists that have been throughout history, and he showed me this video where it has some people some of these main actors in these times, and they brought up that the Pharaoh during the time of the Exodus could have been an Antichrist, and that it probably was not an Egyptian Pharaoh. He's probably from Assyria, which brought up the fact that this Pharaoh at this time had no idea about Joseph and what he was doing and everything, which had us starting a discussion of how would the Pharaoh not know? Like, how would it not be known that this thing was going on and all of these things? It's a whole compounding video, but I did mention that because last week I said it was 430 years. That's a long time for people to be enslaved and everything, except it wasn't the full 430 years. I'm going to clear that up just in case anybody was wondering or anybody did not double check what I was saying. It's fine. I just want to bring that up. Okay. This week, we are in week 6 of the 52 key chapters of the Bible, which goes over the 10 commandments. So Exodus 20 says, "And God spoke all of these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me." That's the first commandment. The second commandment is, "You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments." The third commandment is, "You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain." The fourth one is, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord rested the Sabbath day and made it holy." I lost my place. 3, 4. Oh, the fifth one is, "Honor your father and your mother, that in your days may be long in the land, and that the Lord your God is giving to you." The sixth one is, "You shall not murder." Seventh, "You shall not commit adultery." Eight, "You shall not steal." Ninth, "You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor." The 10th is, "You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's." And these are the 10 commandments. I know my husband was saying, "You don't know the 10 commandments?" And then just kind of listed them off. I'm like, why would I know the 10 commandments? I didn't even know there were 10 plagues. I thought there were 7 plagues in Egypt, because I'm pretty sure that's what Disney taught me. But yes, there are 10 commandments. Let's see. Open up my journal. I'm just so sorry, you guys. I'm just all discombobulated. Where is it? Week 6. Let's see if I can just hold this up to this camera up here. If I can turn the page. Okay, so it's in my journal. Let me see. Right here, I have the chapter written out. And then the last part of the chapter, and then my notes. Whoops, my notes here. There we go. And then my prayer points. Oh, causing a little strobingness. I'm so sorry, you guys. Just gonna take a breath. I hope your guys' day is going way better than my household's day today. Which is crazy because we slept in really late. So it should have been a great day. Just compounding things on things. So these were the 10 commandments that God spoke to Moses on, is it Mount Sinai? I'm pretty sure it was. I've only read Exodus twice, and I forget locations and names. Yep, Israel on Mount Sinai. And put that there. So we're going to talk about the 10 commandments first before we go to what was said after the 10 commandments. The first one, "You shall have no other gods before me." So God forbids polytheism. And between the first two, which is really great with the 10 commandments, is they're broken up into two like sections. Like the 1 through 4 is man's relationship to God, and then 5 through 10 is man's relationship to their community. And this even goes into the New Testament when they're asking, I believe the Pharisees was asking Jesus, what is the best commandment. What is the greatest commandment? Because they were testing him, and he said the greatest commandment was to love your God, to love God. And then he's like, and then the second best commandment is to love your neighbor. And that's where we get the Good Samaritan parable, which I think is an interesting parable. I had no idea that Good Samaritans like found like their roots in the Bible. This is just fascinating. I'm learning so much reading the Old Testament and the New Testament. But so those 2 commandments that Jesus gave in the New Testament still go with all of these 10 commandments that are in the Old Testament. You have your relationship to God, and you have your relationship to your community. So the first 4 commandments is, you shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make yourself a carved image. You shall not take the Lord your God's name in vain, and you shall remember it the Sabbath day. So those 4. So there's polytheism. You shall not have other gods. And that goes into the false idols and the false images, the false gods and false idols that we ended up talking a lot about last week. This still goes into it. And those are the first 2 commandments that God gave to Moses for Israel on Mount Sinai. And those are, do not have false gods, do not have false idols, do not put anything else above God, for those first 2 mainly. And do not take the name of your Lord God in vain, which is funny. It reminds me of I brought this up to my husband a lot. That movie, The Prophecy, that like horror movie from the 90s. I love that movie. It's one of my favorite movies. I love that movie. Not a great movie, but hey, it has my tribe in it. So super excited with that. And Gabriel in that movie would get annoyed with the humans and upset with them when they would start taking the Lord's name in vain. And it wasn't when they were actually cursing, like saying bad words, like bad swear words, but it was when they actually took the Lord's name in vain that he's like, stop with the profanity. And I wrote notes down. All these notes here that I would have all prettily laid out for you guys if my stuff was working. So I'm trying to get this together. Okay. So for the first commandment, I wrote polytheism. This is the theme throughout the sins of the people, and that's just a theme throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament. Graven images is also an interesting thing. So you have a lot of you go back to the Old Testament, which is actually around this part when Moses went up to talk to God on Mount Sinai. You had the people who were away from Moses for a while. Like he was up there for like I think a week or 2, it says, and they demanded an image. They demanded a statue, something to worship. And they wanted to worship God, but they needed an image to worship. They needed an idol to worship as they were worshiping God. Because if they were slaves in Egypt, that's how a lot of the Egyptians worshiped. They worshiped to idols and to images, and those images and idols would represent their gods. So they would have also the Jewish people worshiping their gods in the same way. And they would be worshiping their gods, and if they wanted to worship God, they had to worship God in the way that the Egyptians said and showed them how to do their worship. So that is a commandment that was put into and it's just like right after this. Moses came down from the mountain and saw everybody worshiping a golden calf. And when he turned to Aaron, he got so mad and he burnt it up and everything. And Aaron was just like, well, they wanted something to worship. So I gave them something to worship. And it was just it cracked me up a lot because the whole Exodus story, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, all of that, their whole travel through the wilderness shows you how much patience God has. Even when they're just when they turn away from him over and over and over again, it even goes throughout Judges, where they turn away from God once they're safe, they turn away from God, and says throughout many times in the Bible, they whore after other gods and idols. To follow him, but not represent him. Oh, that is an interesting take too. That is very interesting, and it goes into what I was reading today with my husband, which is 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. It talks about how people who say that they know God, that they're Christians, but they don't act like they're Christians, and therefore they are liars. I could see that being in taking his name in vain as well. It's also not putting your trust in God's power. It's demeaning God's power, God's wisdom, God's trust, God's love when you start taking them in vain, especially if you go with that type of teaching where you're taking his name in vain by saying, "Yes, I'm a Christian, but I'm not doing Christian things." Okay, like I can think of so many people who are atheists now or agnostics because how many times does it just boil down to, no, you don't just believe science over this because science proves the Bible. It's you were hurt by a person who claimed they were Christian or by a church that claimed they were Christian. Like you were not hurt by God. You were not you are actively trying to say, "No, I don't believe in God or Christianity because of X, Y, and Z." But if you look into deeper meanings of what they're saying and you get them down to their base beliefs, it's not that they don't believe God because of science or because of theology or because of anything else like that. It always boils down to, well, I can't say always, almost always boils down to they were hurt by a person who claimed to be a Christian, or they were hurt by a church that claimed to be Christian. Like before I was a Christian, I followed so many people online on YouTube because I listen to YouTube essays a lot, video essays, or listen to videos a lot while I'm at work. And a lot of these people were or are still are atheists. And when they talk about like their childhood or anything, they talk about all of the trauma that they were put through because of a super religious household. That's where I first learned fundamental Christianity, not what it means or anything. I just learned the term fundamental Christianity. And but yeah, it's a really really big issue. Taking the Lord's name in vain is you're just distrusting the power, the love, the authority of God. And that also goes into the graven image and the following other gods or other idols. But that's a very interesting thing, Hidden. I like the comparison for that, especially for the things that I read today. Is very interesting, and now I have all of that in my head from 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, where he talks a lot about Christians not living Christian lives. Christians saying they're Christians, but not being Christian, not actually being in God's word, following God's commandments, which he does talk about God's commandments in there. And he says the the commandment that God gave was love. God commands us to love. And goes through how it goes to we must love God. And if we love God, we keep his commandments and how we have to love our neighbor, just like Jesus said. And it goes all the way back to these 10 commandments in the Old Testament where it's not it's not taking away anything from it. It is just separating these 10 commandments into two, which you can see clearly that so shall have no other gods, make yourselves graven images, shall not take the Lord's name in vain, and remember the Sabbath day. Oh, let's see what I have here in my Bible. James 5:12. Trying to remember where all of these Bible verses or Bible books are. I'm so bad with this. I'm learning. I thought that said John. I was like, I've read John. I've not read James. Oh, yeah. But above all, my brothers, do not swear either by heaven or by earth or by any other oath, but let your yes be yes and your no be no, so that you may not fall under condemnation. Because even the apostles were talking about swearing and not taking the Lord's name in vain, also went differently from using their name, using God's name as a swear, but also they talk about it in the Gospels that people were swearing, like, I swear by God that I will do this thing or I will not do this thing. They're adding those sprinkles into their conversation and not being very plain with each other and using it as an excuse to either get out of contracts or to not do the thing. And it turned into lying. It turned into lying. And they expand on not taking the Lord's name in vain in the Gospels. And I have it, yeah, James, John, Matthew. I'm trying to read my little handwriting here. I'm so sorry. Those ones were the ones that were put the first three. And then the fourth one is the Sabbath day. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and to do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you, your son, your daughter, your male servant, or your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord God made the earth and the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. And it's going back to the creation story, which is Genesis 2, verse 1 through 3, where he talks about the rest day on the Sabbath. And then in the New Testament, Jesus says that he is the Lord of the Sabbath. And even Paul goes to talking about the Sabbath and how it can not be as rigid as it was in the Old Testament, that it can be a show of faith, but you don't have to keep it as rigidly. Let's see, Matthew 12:3. Hi, Steve. There's Steve. You guys had to see Percy and Steve if you guys can see the stream. There's just all up in my Kool-Aid today. It's talking about David getting the bread from the priests. Have you not read in the law how the Sabbath, the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are guiltless? I tell you, something greater than the temple is here. And if you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless, for the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. That was also a huge thing while Jesus was going around doing his ministry, was that he was doing a lot of healing and teaching on the Sabbath, and the Pharisees and even the Sadducees would try to condemn him for what he was doing on the Sabbath. They were trying to trap him in, saying that he is breaking the law by healing on the Sabbath. I don't think I have the verses with Paul talking about it in the New Testament. I can't even read what this says. Luke? I think it says Luke. Let's see, Luke 6:5. No, it just says, and he said to them, the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. The same interaction, different account. But it does talk about the Sabbath in the New Testament and how it's not as rigid as it was in the Old Testament, which my husband and I were talking about Exodus and Leviticus and the rigidity in it and bringing up people outside of slavery and having them deconstruct from the Egyptian rule that was over them and how they would need that type of structure while they are building their way towards something. All of those are man's relationship to God. We do think that it is good to have time set aside. If you think of the work week as well, as human beings, and me personally having to work a lot, I've had to work multiple jobs at a time. I've had to work days and days and days in a row. And as somebody who's worked multiple shifts throughout my like I've worked overnights, I worked in the afternoons, I worked in the mornings, I worked the regular 9 to 5. I worked all of these different type of things and I met a lot of people doing that. Well, everybody can work 2, 3 weeks in a row every single day. Everybody has the capability to do this. After the second week, your cognitive drive, your cognitive awareness starts to drain, and physically, you become extremely exhausted. And that's why work schedules like that are not recommended to anybody, really. At the very least, you should have 1 day off a week. Yeah, there's a lot of companies that even have that as a policy. There's a lot of states that have employment laws to make sure that people are not working over that. Fortunately, I do not work in a state that has those type of employment laws in it, so I've had to work weeks in a row. And like I said, your cognitive processes start slowing down and you start getting sluggish, you start making mistakes, you start doing all of these things. That's why in my job, if there's an accident or if there's an issue or a problem that possibly a fireable offense, they have to the first question that the post inspector asks you is how long have you been working? When was your last day off? Because there has been many instances where people are being worked a month in straight, no days off. And because they're sluggish, because their reaction time is completely hindered in things, they are not able to function the way they need to because they don't have at least 1 day off a week. And you can see that that is our design. God had designed us this way that we can work, yes. But if we don't at least get 1 day off a week, you start to decline. You start to not be as efficient as you are. And this is going on and I've seen it in many different fields, many different type of jobs and things. You need at least 1 day off a week. And as you get older and, as you continue to do it, you see the need for you to have it. It's just there, and that's how we were created. And then now we go into man's relationship with his community, how people should be with other people. The fifth commandment is honor your father and your mother that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. And this is brought up a few times in the gospels. Yeah, I have it in Mark and Matthew and John, and it is how children should be treating their parents. A lot of the issues that we see today and a lot of these problems, you can see that there's a breakdown in what was laid out thousands of years ago in the Old Testament, the 10 commandments. And these are honoring your mother and fathers, you have to be obedient to them. You have to still respect them. You have to follow their directions, their wishes and everything, especially as a child. Even in the New Testament, when Jesus wandered away into one of the synagogues that were in I forget where, I think it was Jerusalem, And his parents didn't notice he was gone for a couple of days because they were traveling in a large caravan. They thought he was off with the family members until it was a few days, then they realized he wasn't there, and then they went back to the synagogue in Jerusalem, and they got upset with him, like, "Why would you do this? Why are you not doing this?" And they're like, "Well," and he said, "Where else would I be but in my Father's house?" But even after that, it made it very clear that Jesus was obedient to his parents. And now you can see a lot of the media that is coming out, especially aimed towards preteens and teenagers, which are relatively new terms, I have found out. But a lot of the media that is targeted to these children are showing them how to not be respectful and honor your mother and father. The common message is your parents are very flawed human beings, and sometimes you just need to pick yourself up and go against what your parents want to do what's best for you, because obviously you know what is best for you over your parents, which is terrible things to tell children. It's terrible things that, and children do not know what's best for them. I've had children. I've seen children. I was a child. Children do not know what is best for them. There's a reason why children are not allowed to drink and to do drugs and to like smoke and all of these things until they're a lot older, because they are not done developing. Their brains are not, they're not there yet. They're not there yet. They're extremely impulsive. They have no sense of consequences. So children should not be in charge of children's lives. That's and it's something that was very made a lot of common sense until very recently in these past few decades. And it's very prevalent in Western culture, not so much in Eastern culture, but in Western culture, it's very prevalent, and it's no wonders. Like you saw, I don't know if you guys saw it, but I saw that there was a story of a mother who had her children watching the current TV programming. It wasn't like on regular TV, it's like on YouTube and Netflix and things, of the current programming of what was aimed directly to children. And her children were kind of crazy, just running around everything. And she was like, "Oh, that's just kids. Kids will be kids, and that's just how they are." Until she switched what they were watching to older TV shows made it directly for children, like things that were made in the 80s and 90s. And she saw that they were immediately respectful, that they were starting to pick up after themselves. Their whole behavior has changed. And it goes even to like the food children are eating. Here in Western culture, children are on such a junk food diet filled with nothing calories. And you go to like an Eastern country and you ask a child what their favorite food is, it's not going to be a candy, it's not going to be some type of pastry, it's going to be usually a vegetable. And when you ask their parents why would they say this? Why would they say that this is their favorite food? The parents always answer them saying, "We teach them to like healthy food." Like, I don't know if you guys gone out of the United States to eat other food. It's not as sugary and processed, and it's more, most of the time, more healthy for you. Even the most junk foody type things are more healthier for you than the normal junk food that's in the States. But it all comes back down to teaching children to honor and respect and be obedient to their parents. Sorry, I went off on a tangent. It was it's been something I've been looking into a lot here. Yeah, and it's even, like I said, it's brought up in the New Testament a few times where Jesus is directly saying that the children need to honor their parents. And a lot of the monumental things that are happening in the Old Testament, they built a altar, they built a monument, so just to teach your children what has happened. The sixth commandment is you shall not murder, which is a very self-explanatory commandment. Murdering is bad. Most people can agree to that. Murder is bad. And then they even expand on it into the New Testament. Let's see, Matthew I was gonna mark all of these so I wouldn't have to spend this time doing this, and I'm so sorry, you guys. Just all the issues. Matthew, what is it? 5:21. Yep, it's even right here. The Sermon on the Mount that Jesus. Let me turn on this light. There we go. That Jesus said. Chapter 5:21 is talking about anger. You have heard that it is said of those to those of old, you shall not murder. Exodus 20:13. And whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says, you fool, will be liable to the hell of fire. So if you are offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First, be reconciled to your brother and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are going with him to court, lest your accuser hand you over to the judge and judge to the guard, and you will be put in prison. Truly, I say to you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. It really does. First John. I don't know if you guys have read First John. I just read it for the first time today. I'm actually going to put that in my notes because yeah, that's First John is just so full of not being angry and loving your brothers and your sisters. Oops, I went to Revelations. I went a little too far. Like, let's see. See, there's my First John. It is all love your brothers, love your sisters. This is how you show that you are a Christian, that you believe in and trust in God because God is love. Where is my pen? Let me add that right now. And it even goes through, it's a key theme in all of John's epistles. Yeah, the new commandment, beloved, I am writing to you with no new commandment, but an old commandment that you had from the beginning. The old commandment is the word that you have heard. At the same time, it is a new commandment that I am writing to you, which is true in him and in you, because the darkness is passing away and true light is already shining. Whoever says he is the light and hates his brother is still in darkness. Whoever loves his brother abides in the light, and in him there is no cause for stumbling. But whoever hates his brother is in the darkness and walks in the darkness and does not know where he is going because the darkness has blinded his eyes. First John full on goes into all of this. And well, it was in the Old Testament with the 10 commandments, you shall not murder. It goes further than that. Like I said, Matthew 5:21 on the Sermon on the Mount with Jesus talking about if you have hatred in your heart, you have already committed murder. If you are holding something against your brothers or your sisters, like in First John, you are not loving your neighbor. You are already murdering them. James 2:11. Is that James or is that John? You know what I need? I need little tabbies for my books of the Bible. That's what I need. All right. James is pretty short, so I keep skipping over it. For he who said, do not commit adultery, also said, do not murder. If you do not commit adultery, but do murder, you have become a transgressor of the law. So speak and act, and so act as those who are to be judged under the law of liberty. For judgment is without mercy to one who has shown no mercy. Mercy triumphs over judgment. So these are some other New Testaments verses and chapters where I have marked in my Bible that these are places to look for when you want more information about thou shalt not murder. In the Old Testament, it was very clear: don't murder. Anything is considered murder that if it costs somebody their life and it was intentional. If you hated your neighbor and you killed them accidentally, if you hated them, that was murder and you needed to be put to death. If you had no hate in your hearts, you would go to what is the city called? City of Refuge? I don't think it's a city of refuge. I just listened to these. What was it? It might have been City of Refuge. There were cities within a geographical area of all of the the Jewish cities where if you murdered somebody but you didn't hate them, you ran to those cities so that you would not be killed for their death, and you had to stay there until the high priest died. And then when the high priest died, you were allowed to go back to your city and go back to your inheritance, all of the things you had, and to be able to just live your life normally. And those were the rules that were set out in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, like we said, Jesus expands this a lot more with you shall not murder your brother. If you have hate in your heart towards your brother or your sister, you have already murdered them. And they asked, I think it was Peter who asked Jesus how often you should murder, or not often you should murder, how often you should forgive someone. He was like 70 times and then 7 times and then 70 plus times on top. Pretty much continuous. So many times we are called to forgive. So even holding a grudge against somebody is bad. Like even that constitutes like murder, holding hate against them. It's don't do that. And that is one of a really hard thing to do. Well, we are called to forgive them. We're also not called to just trust them with the things that they had before when they were misleading us or lying to us or causing the grudge. Just want to put that in there too. It doesn't mean to be stupid and naive with your trust. It just means to forgive. And then I don't have these commandments numbered. Okay, it says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th. The seventh one is you shall not commit adultery. And there's all talks about all of these commandments, the commandments for your community in Matt, Mark, Luke, and Romans. It's 527 in Matthew is where it expands on it, which again, I really like how these are expanded on in the New Testament, in the Gospels mostly. Yep. This should have just kept my finger in that part of my Bible. It says, "You have heard it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body go into hell." So, yes, it expands on adultery for other physical adultery with people who are not your spouse. If you look, and it goes for women too, if women look at men lustfully, they're committing adultery as well. And it also goes back to your relationship to God. God talks about in the Old Testament the children of Israel whoring after false gods and false idols. So the adultery doesn't just go with physically with your people who are not with your spouse physically, even it goes to if you're looking at people lustfully, it goes that's committing adultery in your heart and is amounts to the same to God as doing it physically. And then it also goes to whoring after false gods and idols. That is also committing adultery. And that is the only or one there's a couple, but that's the main reason why you can divorce your spouse is adultery. Even Jesus is talking about divorce. Like it's in the next line on the Sermon on the Mount. It is also said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Take every thought captive. Yes, God's instruction for fighting intrusive thoughts. Yes, you have to take your thoughts captive. Being a Christian doesn't mean that everything is fine. We're actually talking about this with my husband and I in a conversation about Calvinism. And Calvinist people who are Calvinists I've met or I've listened to or heard of, some of them are the most lukewarm Christians that I have ever met. Some of them are the most zealous. Some of them are just extremely zealous. Other ones, though, are just extremely lukewarm and might as well not be Christians. Like they live very secularly, which is in First John too. Talks about not being of the world. But the committing adultery goes to, like I said, it goes physically, it goes through your mental capacity, also goes to not following God, putting something above God is also committing adultery. And even though God said that marriage is between one man and one woman, and there were provisions for divorce, that was because we are a fallen people living in a fallen world. And those were put into the Old Testament, like when Moses was talking about divorce and all of these type of things. They're put in there because people are wicked. Naturally, we are wicked. And it's not until you gain a new heart from God that you have a heart of flesh. And that's where all of this starts to make a lot more sense to anybody who is reading it. But Jesus does say, anyone who divorces his wife can only divorce them on the grounds of sexual immorality. Paul expands on it. And I think may have been Romans, it may have been one of his many letters. Paul expands on it that you can also divorce your husband if somebody is married to a non-believer, especially if a woman is married to he uses a woman's situation specifically. If a woman is married to a man who is a non-believer and he leaves her, he has abandoned her and she can remarry. She is not held to her oath to him because he is a non-believer and he has abandoned her. I've been listening to a lot on marriage and divorce, so that's all at the forefront of my mind right now. That was the 7th one for adultery, and the 8th commandment is theft. Theft is the distrust in God's provision, or not provision, providement. Even in, I think it just says, you shall not steal. So you shall not steal. That is one, you're taking away from the collective of the group. The way that when the Jewish people got to the land of Canaan, each were given their inheritance based on the size of their tribe. And then each tribe got a section of land with cities and things that were taken that they defeated the Canaanites in, and it was all based on the size of their tribe. So the bigger tribes got bigger pieces of land so that they could have more and expand a little bit more. And it was all sectioned off. And each of these families had an inheritance inside those inheritance of their tribes. So they all were given, this is what you have. This is what you have. This is your stuff. So stealing is taking away from that. And like on the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus had a whole section of that as well. This is one of my favorite passages in Matthew. This is one, and it helped me a lot. It's called, in the ESV version, it's called "Do not be anxious. Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life. What will you eat or what will you drink? Nor about nor about your body, what will you put on? It is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they? And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life? And why are you anxious about clothing? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass of the field, which today is alive and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, will he not much more clothe you? O you of little faith. Therefore, do not be anxious, saying, what shall we eat? Or what shall we drink? Or what shall we wear? For the Gentiles seek after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them all. But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all the things will be added to you. Therefore, do not be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble. This is the whole Sermon on the Mount is great, but this one specifically goes back to you shall not steal. Do not be a thief. When you're being a thief, you are not taking away. You are distrusting God. You are not putting your faith in God. Jesus even says that you of little faith. You are not trusting in God to provide for you, which we are told to do. Like even when the apostles were sent out by Jesus, they were only told to not take a bag for money and to just take like a second cloak, and they had very minimalistic clothes, and they were told to that God would provide for them. And it goes to us now trying to hoard things, and we as people like things. We like new things. We like to have a build up of things, which is funny. Now that I'm thinking about it, you have like medieval lore and things about dragons hoarding treasure. And in the Bible, the dragons are a representation of the devil, of Satan, hoarding treasure. And we naturally want to do a lot of that. But that's also because of our fallen nature. In your faith as a Christian, you should be trusting in God to be able to provide for you. And personally, like me and my family, like we're not rich. We're okay, but there's a lot of financial struggles that we go through. And it wasn't until we started just be like, we're just going to trust in God, which my husband, who was a Christian before me by a few years, he handles all the finances. So he did that a lot way before I did. Now I'm not anxious about money, and we are provided for. We have a roof over our head. I have internet barely sometimes, but I have it. We have food to eat and we have clothes to wear. And it goes back to you shall not steal. And even when looking at the way that the structure was and how it was like none of you shall be poor, and it was like people today are calling for a communist society, which and works on a smaller scale. Communism works really great on a small scale, not on a large scale. But they're calling for communist things. It's like, have you been to a communist country? I have. You know what is one of the biggest problems besides bribery and corruption? It is theft. Because if everybody gets the same thing, people who are in a fallen nature and want to be place themselves above other people, the only way they can do it is by stealing others people's things. So theft is a huge problem in communist countries. It is one of the biggest problems. Like it's so to the point where if you're traveling to any one of these countries, like that's the biggest thing is you have to hide your money. You have to hide your valuables because it'll be stolen. Better yet, don't wear any valuables. Kind of look like the local people, but they're also the same type of society that wears like Gucci and Louis Vuitton and wants to project themselves as better than what they are. and it leads to a breakdown in their societal structure. And it all goes back to you shall not steal. And the ninth commandment is you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. And false witnesses, I have Matthew 18:15. Oops. Went a little too far. Goes to in mine, it says, if your brother sins against you, you tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you have gained your brother, which goes back to loving your brother and not committing murder. But if he does not listen, take one or two others along with you, that every charge may be established by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. If he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if he refuses to listen even to the church, let him be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. Truly I say to you, whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Again, I say to you, if 2 of you agree on earth about anything they ask, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am among them. So this is a structure that's also used. I know Mike Winger's bringing this up a lot while he's doing his series of trying to expose false teachers, which is a very interesting series if you guys have not seen that. Once I get everything situated on here, the interwebs with this whole stream, I'll also put his channel down below. He's a good teacher to listen to. I don't agree with everything he says, but I do like his exposed series too, because that scratches that true crime culty itch that I have from my pre-Christian life. But this goes back to loving your brother, loving your neighbor, and lying. Like, we're not supposed to lie, because lying is also like taking the Lord's name in vain. It falls into that because it's not trusting in God. It's going back to saying, I'm a Christian. I have the Spirit of God in me. And then when you're lying, like, no, you're a liar. You're a liar. You do not have God's Spirit in you. And that's all of what First John is saying as well. And then bearing false witnesses is lying against your brother. That's committing a murder according to the New Testament because you hate your brother. And it's also lying. And it lays out rules of how to bring witnesses and evidence. One of the things that I really like about the New Testament when it talks about this, it goes against what I was taught previously in my non-Christian life about especially in particular when it's coming against like women, is that they will not be believed. They are not supposed to be trusted. Their testimony is lesser than a man's, which at that time, yes, women's testimony just across the board was considered lesser than men's. But you're supposed to talk with your brother face to face and tell them what they are doing and like what your feelings on it. You're supposed to confront them privately. And if they stop doing what they're doing wrong, then that's where you bring up evidence and you bring up witnesses, not just random people, witnesses. And you all confront them. If the person is still like, I'm not doing anything wrong, then you bring in the church. And then at the end of that, I really like, for where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am among them. It's Jesus talking about what constitutes a church. It's not like where, I don't know where in the story it is, but Lydia, the seller of purple, she was where she met Paul because the women were gathering, the Jewish women were gathering, talking in their discussions and their teachings on God, because at that time you needed 10 men at minimum to create a synagogue. If there was not 10 men to create the synagogue, the men were not allowed to gather in a public place to worship God. Which is I understand having a number, a minimum number of people to be like, all right, this is we're gonna create this, and we need a minimum number of people. It's like trying to do any type of public event, but to not be able to worship God in public because you do not have 10 men to create a synagogue. Therefore, you just don't do it. Is just wrinkles my brain on how it even goes to that. But the restriction was not on the women. And you see a lot in Paul going through his missionary, he talks to a lot of the women, mostly because he was talking to Gentiles. So the Gentiles were mixed in with the Jewish women who were allowed to talk in public and worship God in their faith publicly because these restrictions weren't on them. Women could gather. There was no minimum amount of number of women because there was no woman specific synagogue. So like Lydia was was meeting these women, and that's how she met Paul, and then she had a lot of faith in God, and she ended up having a church in her house where they would just come and visit and meet with Paul while he was teaching. And it got to the point where it was so big that they couldn't fit. But I did like how that was put in there, along with how to confront your brother or your neighbor to be able to not bear false witness, to be like, no, this is what happened, this is how we're supposed to confront you, and your brother should be able to see the confrontation for what it is, and if they are truly saved and truly believe in God, they should be able to see their sin and what they are doing is wrong and correct it. It's just like that famous verse that everybody says, you shall not judge. Like, yeah, that's one part of it. Did you read the rest of it? You didn't read the rest of it. You don't know it. You must pull the log out of your eye before helping your brother remove the splinter from his. And the last commandment is coveting. The one I have in this one is actually Romans. I like Romans. Romans reads really well. I can't wait till I get to it again. I'm alternating what books I'm reading. Romans, I read with my husband when we were doing our Bible study. What is this? 7:7. In mine, it is. Oh, wait, let me read the actual command. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. And that goes back into adultery. You shall not commit adultery. And coveting leads, if you are not fully saved, if you do not trust in God enough, or even I don't know if it's enough is the right word. If you do not trust in God, coveting what your neighbor has will lead to theft, which will break another commandment, you shall not steal. In Romans 7:7, it says, what then shall we say, that the law is sin? By no means. Yet if it had not been for the law, I would have not known sin, for I would have not known what it is to covet if the law had not said, you shall not covet. But sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, produced in me all kinds of covetousness. For apart from the law, sin lies dead. I was once alive apart from the law, but when the commandment came, sin came alive and I died. The very commandment that promised life proved to be death to me, for sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, deceived me and through it killed me. So the law is holy and the commandment is holy and righteous and good. This one, it was confusing to me for a while. The law is the divine standard. These are the laws, these are the commandments that God has given us as people, just as human beings. And the way that he's talking about this is how he realized covetousness and like sin came alive through covetousness, and he would not have known it if he did not know the law. If you do not know the law, you are unaware of how you are breaking the law. But just like in for realsies life, Ignorance of the law is not a defense against the law in a court of law. You cannot say, I did not know that this was a law. You'll still get a ticket. You'll still get fined. You'll still get put in jail, whatever the case may be. If you break the law, you can't say, well, I didn't know it was not a law. It doesn't work that way. The same thing goes through the divine standard laws that God has given us. And even Paul talks about those who have not received the word and how they will be judged if they die is they'll be judged on a different standard because they have no knowledge of the law. But currently now everybody knows the law, like almost everybody. There's a few little blips on the map that I've seen that do not have like a Bible. Ignorant of the law, beaten with fewer stripes. Thank you, Hidden. Hidden lives all up in the New Testament. If I have any questions about what was this thing that was said, I just ask Hidden. But yes, ignorance of the law, you'll be beaten with fewer stripes. So you'll still be punished, but not as severely. But he talks about not knowing the law. You're not knowing how you are breaking the law. But once you know the law, which the law is those 10 commandments. The law is the 2 commandments that Jesus gives us in the New Testament. Love your God, or love God above anything else, and love your neighbor. Breaks down to those 2 commandments. And coveting is opening yourself up to sin. Like I said, it leads to theft, it leads to adultery, it leads to being unsatisfied and distrusting God. I've seen people who have deconstructed from Christianity because they were saying that God did not make them rich and famous. So they left the church. And it wrinkled my brain. Like, what do you mean? God did not make you rich and famous. God doesn't want us really to be rich and famous. Like, how many times does it say, woe to those who are rich in the New Testament? Anytime a rich person is brought up, Jesus tells them, woe to them that are rich. It's going to be harder for a rich person to gain entrance into the kingdom of heaven than the poor. But they've left the church because they thought that God would give them all the things. And it's like, no, God is not a genie. You do not make a wish and God fulfills it. God has a glorious plan for each and every one of us. But it is glorious in his will, not to what you think is glorious. I mean, look what happened to the apostles. They had a great plan for them. And I love how even Justin Peters brings that up a lot. Luke 12:47. See, Hidden is just the bestest at this. Luke is before John 12. Hey, nice. I have a lot marked up in Luke. Oh, wow. I even have little stars and everything. All right, 12:47 and 48. And that servant who knew his master's will, but did not get ready or act accordingly to his will receive a severe beating. But the one who did not know and did what deserved a beating will receive a light beating. Everyone to whom much was given, of him much will be required, and from him to whom they entrusted much, they will demand more. Yes, yeah. So it's not ignorance of the law does not mean that you are able to just get away with it. There's a lot of people I see as well who are arguing against apologists and saying that God knows my heart. So I'll get into heaven if heaven really exists because God knows my heart and I'm a good person. Like, no, you know the law now. Like you know it. If you live in a Western country or any of these type of societies that are built up, if you have access to the internet, you have knowledge of the law. And the law are these 10 commandments. They used to have, with great power comes great responsibility. all of these cliches that were in these stories have a lot of biblical type of leanings, not leanings, origins. Words are hard. But yeah, there used to be buildings with the 10 commandments written outside of them, and I remember that people were really upset about that. I know the Church of, Satan, the Satanic Church, there's nothing new under the sun. Yes, I read where that was at. I read that in Psalms, I read that in Proverbs, and that was from Solomon. Solomon said that a lot. Solomon was so discontent with how much he was just like, "There's nothing new." Like, it must have been why he had thousands of wives. But they used to have outside of all of these government buildings, or especially outside of like courthouses and things, the 10 commandments, until like the Church of Satan was like, we need to take down the 10 commandments, or I can put our commandments for the Church of Satan here too. And they started pushing it, and the way it came out is a lot of the 10 commandments were removed, but there's still the outline. Even in the way that they were changed in the New Testament, they are still the outline of how people should live. Like, even secular people, if they took out, like, the couple of ones where they're just like, "Oh, no, I don't know if God is a real thing," or anything, like, just the ones where God gives his commandments for man to relates to his community. If they would follow that, like, that would be a we would have a way better society than it is. But it is the enemy's plan for us to have a breakdown and get further and fall further and further away from God. And it shows with the 10 commandments, like in the way that they're expanded into the New Testament, you can see how we have fallen so far away. We have fallen so far away from God, and it's a sign of it being almost the season, like, in my opinion. The further and further we fall into depravity, the further we fall away from God, and the further we fall away from his commandments, and these are the 10 commandments that he has given us, this covetousness. Yeah, for 15, Matthew 15:19. What is that? For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false witness, slander. These are what defile a person, but to eat of unwashed hands does not defile anyone. Yeah, because that was the thing that Jesus said. And that was another thing my husband and I were talking about. We were talking about what defiles a person, like this whole thing. We weren't in Matthew at the time. We were talking about media consumption because we love horror movies. We love horror movies. I don't know if you can see behind me, but we love comic books, we love stories, we love video games, we love all of these things. And there are a lot of Christians out there who I think are under the misguided thought that they cannot watch horror movies. They cannot be a part of any of these type of communities because that goes against God. And we're talking, what was it? I think we brought it up by K-pop demon hunters on how there's a very polarizing view within the Christian community online about K-pop demon hunters. But like we brought up this verse, what defiles a person? Let me read the whole thing. And he called the people to him and said, "Hear and understand. It is not what goes into the mouth that defiles a person, but what comes out of the mouth. This defiles a person." When the disciples came and said to him, "Do you know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard this saying?" He answered, "Every plant that my heavenly Father has not planted will be rooted up. Let them alone. They are blind guides, and if the blind lead the blind, both will fall into a pit." But Peter said to him, "Explain the parable to us." And he said, "Are you still without understanding? Do you not see that whatever goes into the mouth passes into the stomach and is expelled? But what comes out of the mouth proceeds from the heart, and this defiles a person. For out of the heart comes evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false witness, slander. These are what defile a person. But to eat with unwashed hands does not defile anyone." As Jesus didn't wash his hands in the same dramatic fashion that the Pharisees did. So they were upset with him, and he was just like, "It's not what goes into your mouth." But we were thinking about, does this expand to what type of things you consume? Because this is what not what comes into you, but what you expel out, like what you say, the lies that you talk. He talks about all of the things that are brought up in the Ten Commandments and how those defile people and how that comes from your heart and comes out of you. Because if you do not have a new heart and you have a heart of stone, you will fall into all of these pit, because we are all living in a fallen world. We're all terrible people until we accept Jesus Christ into our hearts as a Lord and Savior, and he gives us a new heart. And that expands on covetousness. And I know that's a big thing. Lust, and I haven't seen anger in the online places that I'm at that a lot of people struggle for. I see people struggling both with lust and covet covetousness. I've seen those being the biggest thing, and how covetousness leads into their lustfulness and all of these things. And those are some things that are the very big of factors of what people how people fall away from God. And it lays out all of these rules in the Old Testament and then expands on them in the New Testament. These are the commandments that we are to live our lives by as Christians. And it's not easy. These are some of the hardest things to do, because you have to go against your fallen nature for it. But after these, where was I? There it is. Now, when all the people saw the thunder and the flashes of lightning and the sound of the trumpet and the mountain smoking, the people were afraid and trembled, and they stood far off and said to Moses, "You speak to us and we will listen, but do not let God to speak to us lest we die." That is a lie. He speaks to them and they do not listen. That they do not listen. But they said they would, but they didn't. Moses said to the people, "Do not fear, for God has come to test you, that the fear of him may be before you, that you may not sin." People stood far off while Moses drew near to the thick darkness where God was. So when God showed all of this, and it was one of the funniest things I've seen, but it makes sense if it would make sense to me in the pre times long, long ago, where they're trying to say that a scientific explanation about the Old Testament in Exodus, what was going on. It was just like, it was just a volcano. It was just a volcano. How else will you see a cloud of smoke or a column of smoke and then a column of fire at night? Those poor older Jewish people were just seeing a volcano for the first time and had no idea or understanding. Like, if you read the account, like, that's crazy. I'm like, I have never seen a volcano move to lead a people. But that's a secular explanation. And the people were scared. The people were scared because God was right there. And they're like, we cannot hear God or else we will die. So they asked Moses to be the mouthpiece for God, to take what he was saying and tell it to them, and they will listen to him. And that's how they wanted the structure to be. They needed that what is that word? Intermediary? I see how it's spelled in my head. Intermediary from God. But then they don't listen. They don't listen. Like I said, that's a running theme throughout the rest of the Old Testament. Yeah, people were scared and in awe of God that they begged Moses to be their intermediary. There it is. I spelled it. And then the last part, I think, was supposed to be in chapter 21, but for some reason it ended up in chapter 20, is a law about altars. And the Lord said to Moses, "Thus you shall say to the people of Israel, you have seen for yourselves that I have talked with you from heaven. You shall not make gods of silver to be with me, nor shall you make for yourself gods of gold. An altar of earth you shall make for me and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and your peace offerings and your sheep and your oxen. In every place where I cause my name to be remembered, I will come to you and bless you. If you make me an altar of stone, you shall not build of it hewn stones, for if you wield your tool on it, you profane it. And you shall not go up the steps on my altar, that your nakedness not be exposed on it." And this is actually funny. It reminds me of the pagan people who are druidic in nature, because God doesn't want people to make things of him. It goes into a carven image, because people, especially at this time, would not have kept it as oh, it's just going to be like a pillar or a column. The way that they were worshiping idols and things is they would have made it into a statue of something and would have worshiped said statue. And that would have gone against the second commandment, where they would have literally made a carven image. So God said, "You will make an alt when you make altars to me for the sacrifices and to pray to him." Just because throughout the Old Testament, a lot of people built altars, and they were these huge, ginormous altars. You'll build them of earth or of stone. They will be of natural things, which worshiping the natural things is not the point. Is the natural things represent the altars to God, who does not need the extra. He does not need the extra, and he does not need the people to go further into the extra and start worshiping the images and the things that he brings it up in here too. They're worshiping wood, stone, and metal that cannot hear or listen to them and speak to them. But yeah, I think that was supposed to be in chapter 21, because chapter 21 starts with laws about slaves. So build natural monuments as the altars for them to worship until they build the tabernacle and all of the altars and things. Then he gives super specific Lego instructions on how to do that. And that's in Leviticus. Okay. And prayer points. I have 4, but they're pretty big. And it's to help us understand God's word and how to apply these lessons to our life. Like I said, these are 10 commandments were given in the Old Testament and refined into 2 commandments from Jesus in the New Testament, in the new covenant for people, but they all come back to these 10. They all come back to these are how we should live our lives. And if you read the Old Testament alongside the New Testament, Jesus and the apostles, they expand more on how we as Christians should be living our lives. These are the things we should be doing. And it goes back to like I said, expands on all of these. And if you read them together, you'll have a better understanding of the outline that God expects us to live our lives by. And that's the first prayer point. The second one is open our eyes to see how we treat each other. A large problem that I see people, which is funny because empathy is a superpower now. It's even in video games, empathy is the superpower. We are so far gone and far away from God that we are so into our tribalism. We have to group ourselves into with other people to have our own little group of people, that we therefore judge other people outside of our group, because people keep making their own echo chambers where they hear their opinions repeated back at them in agreement, that they have no opposition, no perspective changes on it, and that's not good. And when you go into that, especially in a Christian community, you could get pharisaical. You get very legalistic with what God was saying or what Jesus was saying in the New Testament or what was written in the Old Testament. And if You pray to have your eyes open to see how we treat each other. You open that empathy to the other person, whether they're Christian or not. Doesn't matter. The way you treat other people and how they treat you in turn. There's some people that you should not be treating, or they should not be treating you the way that they do for whatever reason. And this is where people get into like, oh, I'm going to go no contact with them. I'm going to cut them out of my life, which I'm not saying that's wrong to do. There's a lot of people I've cut out of my life before I was a Christian. Now, as a Christian, the people who are not good for my life and who do not appreciate or like the way that I'm going forward with my Christianity, they're naturally falling away. I'm not cutting them out of my life. They're just falling away because they don't want to talk about all of these things. They don't want to tell me about what's going on in their life because they're like, I'm transitioning or I'm doing this, because they don't want to hear my opinion on it anymore because it's opposing theirs and they don't like the conflict. So they're just naturally falling away. But I think that we should pray that our eyes are open, not only to how we are treating each other, but also how we're treating ourselves and our own sins. And I think that we should pray that God opens our eyes to these things so we can better understand it and hopefully stop doing the sinful things and to better follow the path that Jesus told us to follow in the New Testament. The third one is understand how our choices can lead us closer to God or fall further away. And my husband and I were talking about how all of these choices are laid out for people throughout the Bible. It's you always have a choice to follow God and God's commandments or to not. Do I eat from the apple or do I eat from the tree or do I not? Do I listen to the thing that says, has God really said? And every choice you make can take you closer to God or take you further away from God. And just like how the previous PowerPoint helps you see what you're doing and how you're treating other people and your own sins, I think being able to pray to understand how your choices affect the world, because everything has a ripple effect. There's nothing isolated. Even if you're on an island, there's nothing isolated. Everything you do, everything you say, whether you're a Christian or not, has a ripple effect that goes out into the world. And if you don't understand how that works, I think you should pray for it. And I pray for it, even though I can understand how that ripples out. I still pray for an understanding because I don't know everything. I'm a new Christian. I'm learning as fast as I can, but I'm still learning. I don't have all the answers. So I pray for an understanding of it. And the last one is submit to God. This is in my daily prayers. The prayers that I do every day is I'm submitting myself to God. Everything I have, everything I am belongs to God. And there's a lot of people who still try and say, this is my stuff. This is my money. This is my food. This is my emergency supplies. And I'm like, well, everything I am and everything I do is because of God. And praying to that you submit to God so God can open up your eyes to see that the path that he has laid out for you. Because like I said, God has a plan for everybody. Whether you think it's a beautiful plan or a great plan is a completely different story, but God has a plan for everyone. And I think that if you do accept Jesus as your savior, you should submit to God in all the things that you do. And just like Hayden said, we have to take every thought captive, and it goes down to those choices that you make. Do you decide to submit to God, or do you decide to submit to your fleshly desires or to yourself? And tell you one choice is right and one's not. But these again are the choices that God gives us. But that is it for my week 6. So thank you guys so much for staying with me throughout all of these technical difficulties that we're having today. Next week is we are leaving Exodus. So we spent 2 weeks in Exodus. Next week we are starting First Samuel, and we'll have 1 week in First Samuel and then 1 week in Second Samuel. The one for next week is First Samuel 17. So that's the David and Goliath story, which is interesting because I've read that 3 times the past couple of days, and I'm just like, interesting, 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 interesting. But thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. I hope you guys have an amazing day, night, afternoon, whatever it is where you are. Don't forget to subscribe, like, do all of the YouTube things. And my next, yeah, like I said, my next one will be First Samuel 17. And I hope you guys have an amazing time, and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.